From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
3 days in a row and 4 times in 8 days, the U.S. military has taken action against objects flying above North America. Yet the Biden administration has been strangely tight-lipped about sharing what it knows about these events with the American public. To put a fine point on it, what the hell is going on up there, Mr. President? Plus, Republican Senators Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott tussle over Republican plans for the future of Social Security and Medicare. Democrats won't mind this intra-Republican feuding. Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot, here with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder-Odell. Let's start with the unidentified flying objects, not to say from they're alien, but they are unidentified in at least 3 cases. First intrusion into U.S. airspace happened on January 28th. The administration didn't tell the public about it until civilians spotted it in the sky above Montana. It forced the administration's hand. They nonetheless waited 8 days to shoot it down, only after it crossed into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of South Carolina, clearly identified as a Chinese spy balloon, although Joe Biden said it was, quote, not a major breach, unquote, even though he ordered it shot down. What does he do with minor breaches? Then Friday and Saturday and Sunday, U.S. jets shut down 3 more objects, one over northern Alaska, another in the Yukon Territory in Canada, and then on Sunday over Lake Huron in the Midwest. First reported, the last one, by congressmen on Twitter after they'd been alerted by administration officials. And no waiting in those instances, as the Pentagon shot down those objects within 24 hours or so. So, Kate, what do we know about these latest 3 objects and why the president ordered them shot down?
Yeah, Paul. So while most of America was watching the Super Bowl, I was trying to grok what the Pentagon was telling us about these incidents on Sunday night. And it is confusing and not very much. What we know from this one that was shot down Sunday over Lake Huron, or God's country, as some of us Michiganders know it, it was octagonal, they tell us. And the object was not a balloon, though when General Van Herk was asked about, well, what is it? He said, "These are objects. I'm not able to categorize how they stay aloft. It could be a gaseous type of balloon inside a structure, or it could be some type of a propulsion system." So we start to get into here, okay, kind of if it walks and talks like a balloon, maybe it is a balloon, but they're not saying that. They're referring to it as an object. Some other really concerning details about this, Paul, is that there was some activity over the radar. Got something in Montana on Saturday around 6 o'clock. F-15s went to take a look at it, but the Pentagon says, well, we couldn't get fidelity on it because it was getting dark. Everyone should sit with that for a moment. And so they had to take another opportunity to look at it on Sunday. They're assuming that what they shot down over Lake Huron, I believe, is what they were looking at on Saturday, but did not have the kind of radar fidelity that they wanted to be sure.
So the thing that they said on Saturday, and they told this to Steve Daines, the senator from Montana, and others, was a blip over Montana. They shut down airspace over Montana. Then they said, oh, false alarm, we lost it. They think now that has showed up over Lake Huron?
Yes. That is what they are theorizing at this point, yes, is that it wasn't a blip, but it looks like the same path that then appeared over Lake Huron.
How did they miss it when it was over Minnesota and Wisconsin?
Well, can I just jump in here? They appeared that they saw another blip in Montana and then in Wisconsin and then in Michigan, which is why they think that that was the same object from Saturday.
I see. Okay.
Right. So very confusing set of facts here. But I do think one other point that's worth mentioning is that the official explanation we've been getting is that basically after the Chinese spy balloon, the Pentagon changed the kind of like search filters on its radars so that it could see more threats. You know, they looked at different speeds, different altitudes that they weren't looking at before. If this is supposed to be reassuring, it simply is not, because it means perhaps there's been things in our airspace that we're not aware of for some time now. So I think, one core lesson we can talk about more is this has revealed some real gaps in our awareness in our own airspace, and we're going to have to fill those gaps. Invest in the kind of radars, we haven't even talked about missile defense, but invest in missile defense and other kind of platforms that can help manage these threats.
Let's listen to some of the chatter on the weekend. We have Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, explaining that he had talked to the National Security Advisor of the United States in the White House, Jake Sullivan, who told them that these 2 on Friday and Saturday events were probably balloons. We didn't hear that from the administration. And then Michael McCaul, Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Republican, also talking about these episodes. Let's listen.
The Chinese were humiliated. I think the Chinese were caught lying, and I think it's a real step back for them. Yes, I think they're probably going to have to get rid of it or do something, because they look really bad. And they're not just doing the United States. This is a crew of balloons. We saw one in South America. They've probably been all over the world.
It was very clear to me this was an intentional act. It was done with provocation to gather intelligence data and collect intelligence on our three major nuclear sites in this country. Why? Because they're looking at what is our capability in the event of a possible future conflict in Taiwan. They're really assessing what we have in this country. I find it extraordinary the timing of this flight as well, right before the State of the Union speech, and also, right before Secretary Blinken was scheduled to meet with Chairman Xi. I think it was very much an act of belligerence on their part.
Well, Kim, of course, the two were talking here about the two men about the Chinese balloon that has been identified as Chinese, and China has admitted. The other three objects have not been identified. But what do you make of that exchange? I have to say, I just find it puzzling that the administration seems happy with Chuck Schumer being your spokesman on this sort of thing. From my point of view, not exactly the gold standard for national security credibility.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Paul, although maybe a sight better than the comments we've received so far from President Biden, who wasn't exactly reassuring either, saying that this was no big deal and people send surveillance into each other's territories all the time. Look, I think one reason you don't want to listen to Chuck Schumer on this is that it doesn't sound as though some of that information is correct. Subsequent reporting, this was in the New York Times, suggests that these were not, in fact, similar objects, and that the Pentagon is reporting that the first one that was shot down on Friday broke into pieces upon detonation, which would suggest it was not a balloon. The second one, which was cylindrical, they do think was a balloon. The third one, again, broke into pieces. And so there's a real possibility here that whoever is behind this, and by the way, there's still a possibility that this could be numerous different adversaries or actors, that they are using a broad array of unmanned aerial surveillance devices, which could include balloons, but could also include some forms of unmanned drones that are slow moving. In fact, there's a lot to suggest that China has been investing a great deal in an unmanned aerial surveillance program overall. And there is a lot of new technology. This is something a lot of countries are doing. We're doing it too. But it's just now that we're really focusing and becoming more aware of how broad a program it had become, especially on the Chinese behalf. Something else adding to that is that the Commerce Department on Friday added 6 Chinese-related companies onto a list that it maintains of those who are blocked from U.S. technology. All of those companies are related to air and surveillance equipment. There was one, for instance, it's a co-developer of an airship design for very high altitudes. Another one was an owner of a patent for controlling aerial vehicles with satellites and AI. So it sounds as though this may have been going on for quite some time, and we're only now really getting serious about it. As Kate was mentioning, beginning to really look for these things in the skies and come up with a plan of blocking China, at least from using any of our technology to accelerate that program. But from everything we've seen and heard, it does seem we're very much behind the 8 ball and that this is a huge threat.
Well, there's so many unanswered questions. We don't know if they're Chinese objects. We don't know if they're Russian. We don't know the innocent civilian project, somebody testing for weather or some other thing they might be testing for. Are we now finding these because we're suddenly looking for them in a way that we hadn't before? Seems probable. Are they a threat? I don't mean just to civilian aircraft space flying at altitudes that civilian aircraft fly. And if so, well, what do we need to do to detect them, as you suggested earlier, Kate? We could all benefit, I think, from the administration actually talking about it, but they certainly don't want to bring out Joe Biden and do it.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, one of the biggest concerns right now, I think, is that the Biden administration simply tries to take all of this underground. The House Intel chairman, Mike Turner, was talking on TV about how, they've become a little trigger happy, perhaps, in shooting down these objects, but that's better than being permissive. But I think it's worth being concerned that basically, after taking down the spy balloon in such a public embarrassment fashion where it's spotted by civilians and they didn't shoot it out down over Alaska, and Kim can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the draws of moving to Alaska is that nobody's there. It might be an easy place to shoot down the balloon. And so after this, they started to look for these objects, and now they're going to show that they got serious on it. and then never tell us anything about it. I think that would be a really corrosive move. And I think that the administration has a narrowing window here to level with the public about what they've discovered. Laundering these stories through congressmen on Twitter is not transparent. Also, the briefings received so far, yesterday, General Van Herk said that he hadn't ruled anything out. And then we saw a spate of stories about UFOs as in aliens. And then another defense official came out and said, well, we don't really think aliens right now. But this is not helpful. And if the answer, if it's an embarrassment in the sense that we have let our airspace become vulnerable to things that we don't understand and foreign actors have been exploiting that opening, even if that's really the answer, and I think it's possible and probable that it is, that is going to come out eventually, and better to level with the public up front and say, we just became fully aware of this, but we're awake now, and we are going to make investments in these types of radars. We're going to revisit our capacity for sensing these threats. And the defense budget is coming out in the next month, and we're going to really be serious about these capabilities because the American homeland is vulnerable now, and that is protecting it as a core priority. I mean, the Biden administration has an opening to do that, and it would be a public service. But my concern is that the goal is going to be just change the subject as quick as possible.
Well, I don't know that Congress is going to let them get away with that. I mean, they may still resist answering questions and hide behind classification, but I think there are people in both parties, I think, who are going to press on this. At least I hope they will, because I'm encountering an awful lot of people, and maybe our listeners are among them, who are wondering, 4 military actions in 8 days above North America. When we see that happen the last time? Been a pretty long time. I think even longer than I've been alive.